Simon says subscribe and click on the bell icon to receive notifications.
Ensuring that the data that we use is clean is often overlooked, but it is an integral part of being able to analyze a data set accurately. My name is Deborah Ashby, and I'm a Microsoft IT trainer. I've been a trainer for about 16 years now, and I've worked in the wider IT industry for about 27 years. So I've pretty much seen Excel evolve from a fairly basic application in the 1990s to the very complex product that it is today. So we're just going to start out, first of all, by discussing why do we clean data in Excel? Why is it so important? Because for me, this is one of the most important things that often gets overlooked. So we'll go through why we clean data, and we'll take a look at some of the common issues you might find when you're working with data that isn't necessarily your own. So maybe you've downloaded data from a system, or maybe you've been sent a spreadsheet by somebody else and you need to tidy it up. We'll take a look at some of the common issues that might arise, and then we'll go through and we'll look at how we can deal with those. So I'm going to show you things like how to quickly adjust rows and columns, how you can delete out blank rows from your data, and also quickly fill any blank cells. We'll take a look at things like removing duplicates and clearing messy formatting. We'll take a look at how we can format our columns correctly, and also how we can convert numbers stored as text back to numbers. I'm going to show you how you can do things like change the case so that everything is consistent across your spreadsheets. And we'll also take a look at how we can remove any weird spaces, line breaks, and non-printing characters from our data set. I'll show you how to find and replace data. That might be something that you're reasonably familiar with. Checking spelling. Hopefully we're all reasonably familiar with how to do that in Microsoft, but we'll run through it anyway. I'll show you how to format data as a table, and also how some basics of using functions to extract data. I'm going to throw in here, we are going to do a little bit of pivot tables. So if you're interested in that, just after we've cleaned our data, we're going to put it into a nice pivot table. I'm going to show you a couple of little tricks in there as well. And I'm also going to show you a little bit on how you can use Power Query to clean your data, as opposed to doing it all with Excel functions and utilities. So quite a lot of stuff to cover there. As usual, I'm going to throw in as many helpful hints and keyboard shortcuts as I can, just to make sure that we're working through as consistently and as efficiently as possible. If you create your own data, then, you might be excellent at Excel and everything might look nice and perfect and be ready to analyze. But more often than not, we are getting our data from other sources. So maybe we're downloading it out of a third-party system, maybe something like SAP, or maybe we are downloading a file from the internet and bringing that into Excel. Or maybe we've just been sent a spreadsheet from a colleague who really doesn't know how to use Excel very well, and it's just a little bit of a mess. All of these scenarios, we need to know how to clean up that data and make it tidy. And that's all we really mean when we say cleaning data. We just want to make sure that it's formatted correctly, it's consistent, and any errors or things that could cause us problems when we analyze it, we want to make sure that those have been removed. Now, if we don't do this, we might find that we get problems further down the line as the resulting analysis ends up messy and inaccurate. So this is really, really important if you want to take your data set and maybe create pivot tables, pivot charts, or even just regular charts, or even if you're just extracting information using things like lookup formulas. If we don't have our data clean, we're going to have problems. So this is why it is so important. You might come across things like inconsistent column widths and row heights. You might find that your data set has blank rows, columns, or cells. And things like blank rows really do cause us problems when we're doing things like pivot tables. We might have duplicate data, so duplicate rows in there. Again, that is going to throw off our analysis. We might have inconsistent case, which can make our analysis look really messy and hard for people to read. The same goes for things like inconsistent spacing. It can start to make our analysis look messy. We might have numbers in our data that instead of being formatted as numbers, they're formatted as text. And this can cause a whole heap of problems, particularly if we're using formulas which rely on those being numbers. They're not going to calculate correctly. So we want to make sure that our numbers are actually numbers. We might have our columns formatted incorrectly. So instead of a date column, we might have it formatted as text or general. And again, it's not going to display correctly. We might find that we have things like messy formatting that's been brought across. This is a really common one, particularly if you're downloading files or copying information from the web into Excel. It will come across with that formatting from the original source. So we might want to do things like remove unwanted formatting or borders or bold, things like that. We might find that when we download our data set that the text isn't split up correctly, or it isn't split up as we need it to be split up. For example, if you have a column that has people's names in it, you may need it to be split up into first name and last name. So we need to know how we can deal with that type of scenario as well. We might have things in our data that need to be replaced. So maybe we need to replace abbreviations with the full word, things like that. We need to make sure that our headers are specified in our data as headers. Again, it's going to make our analysis a lot easier. And we want to remove anything that's completely random. So if we've got any strange characters that have come across or any random line breaks, we need to know how to deal with that as well. Now, these are just some of the issues that you might come across when you're downloading a data set. Now, just by looking at this data set, you can probably, it looks a mess. You can see many things that are wrong with this data set. So some of the things which are immediately obvious, well, we can see that the rows and the columns are not wide enough and not tall enough. So for some of these, it's kind of cutting off the data. So we need to do something about that. I can see that I have these hash marks. So again, that's because the column isn't wide enough. I can see that we have some strange orange formatting going on. And I can see that some cells have borders and other cells don't. So we need to deal with that. I can see that we have blank rows in here, and I can also see in column B that I have some inconsistencies when it comes to spacing and also case. So those are the things that I can see immediately just by looking at this spreadsheet. Now, there might be other little gremlins lurking around that I can't quite see at the moment, but we will see them as we start to work through. Now, the first thing I'm going to do so that I can see all of my data is we're basically going to auto fit the columns and the rows. Now, the quickest way to do this, and we're going to deal with the columns first of all, is to hover our mouse over column A until we get that black down arrow, click and drag across so that we're selecting all of those columns. And then if we want to auto fit all of the columns so that they are wide enough for the data contained within them, hover your mouse over any of these borders until you get that double headed arrow and just double click. And that will auto fit all of those columns. That is basically a quick way of going to the home ribbon, going into format and going to auto fit column width. That option will do exactly the same. It's just a lot quicker to double click. Now we can do the same thing when it comes to the rows. If you take a look here, we've got some rows in here. So I could do auto fit row height as well. Again, I could double click on the row boundary in order to change that as well. Okay, so now we've adjusted the column widths and the row heights. Really nice and simple. Well, I can see that I have some blank rows in my data set. So where we have row 8, that's blank, row 13 is blank, row 19, row 29. Now I could go through, if I just had 1 or 2 blank rows in my data, I could simply select the row, right click and go to delete. But if I've got a data set that's very large, maybe I've got 20,000 rows and I've got blank rows throughout, I really don't want to be going through doing these individually. That is going to be too long. It's going to take me too much time. So we can do this quickly by utilizing Go to Special. Now, once again, I'm going to select all of the columns. So I'm going to hover my mouse over column A until we get that little black drop down arrow and drag across. Now, a quick way of jumping to Go to Special is to use the keyboard shortcut Control G. That's going to take you to Go to, and then we can simply click Special. Now, what we can do in here is that we can tell Excel what we want to select in our data. So we want to select all of the blanks that are contained within our selection. So when I do this and click on OK, can you see now it's selecting all of those blank rows, which means I can delete them all in one go. So I'm going to go up to the home ribbon, into delete, and then delete sheet rows. And that is going to get rid of them all in one go. So much quicker than going through and doing them all individually. Maybe we have blank cells like this. It's always better to have a value in here than just leave the cell blank if we're doing some kind of analysis. So even if you just put a 0 in here, that is better than nothing. So how do we automatically input a 0 into all of the blank cells? Well, again, we can select the entire data set if you wanted to, Control A, or if it's just in specific columns, you can just select those columns. And again, we're going to use Go to Special. So Control G again, Special, and we're going to choose blanks. This time it's just going to highlight those blank cells. And if I want to put a 0 in all of those in one go, I just press 0 and Control Enter. And it's going to fill them all in. Okay, so go to Special, type in 0, Control, Enter. That is a way to deal with blank cells. It's always better to have 0 as opposed to nothing in there. Let's deal with the formatting, because we've got these grey shaded backgrounds on some cells, we've got orange, and I can also see that I've got some weird sort of borders up here as well. So I want to make everything more consistent and just remove all of this formatting. So I'm going to select all of my data. So I can click anywhere in my data, little keyboard shortcut to select all of your data, Control A to select everything. Now that Control A keyboard shortcut is worth noting if you're clicked outside of your data set. So if I'm just clicked randomly on a cell here and I press Control A, that's going to select the entire spreadsheet. If you just want to select your data, make sure you're clicked within your data when you press Control A. And this is a really simple one. We can go to the Home tab. In the editing group, we have a clear option just here. And we have a few things that we can clear, but I just want to clear the formatting. So I'm just going to choose clear formats, and that's going to remove those weird borders and the background shading that I have there. Nice and straightforward. Something which is actually quite hard to see just by looking at your data is if you have any duplicates in your data set. And when I say duplicate, I mean an exact duplicate. So where everything, every single column is duplicated. So it's a true duplicate. How can we remove those, or how can we check for those? Well, in Excel, we do have a Remove Duplicates button, which you will find on the Data ribbon. And Remove Duplicates is over in the Data Tools group. Now, the thing with this button is when you click it, you can tell Excel that your data has headers, which we do. And then we can choose which columns we're looking for duplicates in. So if I want to only remove exact duplicate records where we have exactly the same thing in every single cell duplicated, I want to make sure that I have all of the columns selected just here. So I'm only looking for exact duplicate records. Let's click on OK, and you can see it's found 5 duplicate values and it's removed them. Click on OK again, and they're gone. Okay, so a really nice quick way to remove exact duplicates from your data set. Let's take a look here at column F, because we've got a couple of little things going on here. Now, notice that manufacturing price, we have values in here. So this is basically $3 this is supposed to be. But take a look at these two just here. We have little green triangles next to them. Now, this is because the number in this cell, for whatever reason, Excel thinks this is text as opposed to a number. And we can tell that because text is always aligned to the left-hand side of the cell, whereas numbers are always aligned to the right. So for the rest of these are aligned to the right, so those are correct. But for these two here, they are aligned to the left-hand side of the cell, so it thinks it's text. Now, I want to make sure that these are converted back to numbers. Now, there are a couple of different ways that you can do this. If I've just got 1 or 2, the easiest way to do this is simply to click on the little triangle and just say convert to number. And that's literally going to take it from a number back to text. Now, let me just undo that, Control Z, because what if I have quite a few of these through a very large data set? Maybe I've got over 100 of them. I don't want to have to go through each one, selecting the triangle and converting them to text. So there is a little trick that we can use to do these all in one go. And this does seem a little bit strange, but let me show you how this works. What I'm going to do is somewhere over in a blank cell, I'm going to type in the number 1. And what we're going to do is we're going to copy this number 1, Control C. I'm going to go to the column that I want to apply it to. So let's select all of that data, Control Shift down arrow to select everything. And then we're going to go to paste. We're going to go into paste special, and we're going to say multiply. Click on OK, and that will convert everything to a number. So that is a much quicker way of doing things if you have lots of numbers in a column that are for some reason stored as text. That's a quick way of converting them back to numbers. Okay, so really nice and straightforward. Let's talk about number formatting. Let's deal with that. Now, making sure that the text or the columns are formatted correctly with the correct number formatting is really important. Now, for the most part, if we take a look at the home ribbon in this number group, most things are formatted as general. And general is kind of your middle of the road formatting. You can really apply general to most things, particularly text columns. There are some columns, though, that you want to make sure that you have the correct formatting, such as if you have currency or numbers or dates, you want to make sure we apply the correct formatting for those. So let's take a look through here. Units sold, that's a number. So I want to make sure that we have this set to number. And again, we can adjust those decimal places. I'm going to take those down to 0. Now, all of the next few, these ones are basically currencies. So manufacturing price, gross sales, sales, COGS, and profit. So I'm going to select all of these columns and I'm going to press Control 1 to bring up my Format Cells dialog box. Now I'm going to change these to accounting format. People always ask me, what is the difference between currency format and accounting format? I tend to use accounting format because with accounting format, what you'll find is that when you have numbers in a cell, accounting format makes sure that the decimal place is always lined up and that the currency symbol is kind of shoved across to the left-hand side to keep it out of the way of the numbers. If we use currency format, the currency symbol is right next to your number and the decimal places aren't necessarily lined up. So when it comes to reading down numbers, I prefer accounting format. I find it a lot easier to read. So I'm going to apply that. I'm going to take my decimal places down to 0 and click on OK to apply that formatting. And actually, I think for manufacturing price, I'm going to take those up. Let's move across to the date column. Now, again, in this date column, I've got some strange numbers, and this is a very common thing to find when you're working in Excel. You'll have a date column and you'll look in that date column and these look nothing like dates, and you're left wondering what on earth these exactly are. Well, if you want to know what these numbers actually are, this is basically the number of days past the 1st of the 1st, 1900. So according to Excel, the beginning of time was the 1st of the 1st, 1900, and this is just the number of days past that date. So effectively, dates are simply numbers, but we don't display them as dates until we apply date formatting. So if you take a look at column L, currently this is set to general formatting. So it's just displaying the number underneath. So all we need to do here is change this to short date format, and then we get our correct dates. Now in column B, where we have the country names, we have a few different issues. So we have some inconsistent case. So you can see that some of these are in capital letters and some of them are in proper case where the first letter is capitalized. And I want everything to look like that. So I need to convert the uppercase words into proper case. Also notice that I have some weird indentation going on here. So if you look just before Canada in row 2, we've got a large gap just there. The same thing down here, we have some weird large gaps. So I want to make sure that I remove any weird spacing issues from here as well. Now we can use Excel text functions to do both of these things in one go. So let's take a look at how we would do that. Now, when I'm going through and cleaning up or tidying up a specific column, I like to add in a helper column. So a quick way of adding a brand new empty column is to just select where you want to add and then Control-Shift+. That is going to give you a new column. The first thing I want to do is I want to change the case. So there are 3 functions you can use depending on how you want to change your case. So we have upper, we have lower, and we have proper. So if I wanted to change everything to uppercase, I could use upper. The only argument is the text we want to change. Close the bracket, hit enter, it's going to be uppercase. If I want to change everything to lowercase, I use lower. Nice and straightforward. But in this case, I want to change everything to proper case. Enter, and there we go. If I double click the fill handle, you can see now that all of those words which were in uppercase are now in proper case. So that is looking pretty good. Now take a look at a couple of things in here. It hasn't done anything for the spacing that we have at the beginning just here. So we want to combine it with another Excel function called trim. And what trim does is it will remove any erroneous spaces at the beginning of words or at the end of words, because sometimes if we double click, you can see here the cursor is right up against Canada. So I can see that we don't have any spaces after Canada, but you might find that a few spaces sometimes have got in there and your cursor will appear over here, which means there is space in here. And again, that can cause you problems when you're doing your analysis, but it's really hard to see spaces at the end. So I always like to run things like this using the trim function to remove any of that weird spacing. And the good thing is we don't need to add another helper column. We can simply combine trim with our proper command. So let's go up to the formula bar and I'm just going to add trim on the front here. Our text is generated by the proper command, and we just need to make sure that we close off trim at the end. Control-Enter will keep us in the same cell, and then I can double-click to copy that down. So we've managed to do both things in one go. Now, there is another function that you can add in here, which will deal with things like line breaks. Now, we don't have any of those in here, but if you have a forced line break, and that generally occurs, and if I just show you very quickly, when people press Alt-Enter in between 2 words, and it looks something like that, if we have line breaks, we can effectively remove those using another command called clean. And clean will also remove any non-printing characters that it finds in a cell. You can always add on to the front of this, clean as well, add another closing bracket on the end, and you're basically running 3 different functions on one piece of data. It's going to clean up everything. We can double click to copy it down, and we just have one nice tidy formula. So really simple to clean that up. Now, the eagle-eyed amongst you might have noticed that where we have USA, because we've converted everything into proper case, it's also converted USA down here. Now, we are going to deal with that in a moment because we're actually going to change what this says. So don't worry about that too much at the moment. Everything else is pretty much correct, which means we can simply add in the title up here, like so. One little trick here. Because we don't want 2 columns with the same thing, we only want to keep our clean column. Look what happens if I try and delete out this column just here. I'm going to get a whole bunch of reference errors. Now we get those because the formulas that we're using in that cell, so these formulas just here, reference column B. So if we delete column B, that is why we're getting those reference errors. So what we need to do, and this is a little trick that I use all the time, is we need to basically use paste special and just paste the values, because that is going to remove all of the underlying formulas. So what we can do here is we can select column C, Control C to copy, and then we're going to go to paste and we're going to say paste the values only. So what that does is it just leaves the text that we can see, but it removes the formulas underneath. So now you can see when I click in the formula bar, that trim and proper formula has disappeared, which means we can now delete out that column safely and nothing's going to happen to our text. All right, so really useful little functions. Let's deal with this USA in here. I'm going to do a find and replace. So we're going to select column B and let's press Control H to bring up replace. So this is where we can just simply say what we want to find and then what we want to replace it with. So I want it to find USA and I want it to replace it with the capitalized version of USA. I can click replace all. It's made 140 replacements. Click on OK, and we can close that down. So a really nice and simple, quick way to do that. Of course, we would always want to run a spell check on our data. And again, this is very straightforward. You can go up to the review ribbon and we have the spelling just here. Yes, I want to continue checking. It's telling me that all of my spelling is correct, which is great. So you do want to make sure that you do run a spell check because again, if you have one little thing spelt wrong and you're trying to do an analysis, for example, I've got government up here in cells A2 and A3. If I have one of these spelt slightly wrong, if I'm doing an analysis, it's going to think that those are two entirely separate words as opposed to the same thing. So if I'm doing anything which requires an aggregation, sums, things like that, then that's going to cause us problems. So really important to spell check your data set as well. I always put my data into a table before I even attempt to analyze it. So a quick way of doing that is to press Control T. It's going to pick up where my table is located. You can see those marching ants around the outside. Very important to specify my table has headers. Click on OK. And now I have my data in an Excel table. Now notice what happens as soon as I do this. I now get a new ribbon called Table Design. And we can see that at the top here. And this is where I have all different kinds of tools for my table. So if I want to change the color of my table, maybe I don't like this style particularly, I can change it from there. I can add a total row, things like that. Another thing that we can do here is we can give our table a name. So when we create a table in Excel, in this properties group, you can see it's called Table 1 by default. And every time you create a table, Excel is going to give it that really generic name, Table 1, Table 2, Table 3, so on and so forth. Now, it's always advantageous to give your table a more meaningful name. So I'm going to call my table sales underscore data. And again, when you're naming your tables, you can't have any spaces in those names. So if you've got two words like I do here, you need to separate them with an underscore or just have no space in the middle there. Now, why are tables so important? Well, tables auto expand. So if you create some kind of chart or pivot table, and then you want to add more data into the bottom of this table next month, it means that the table will expand to accommodate the new data. And it means that any charts that are built off of this data can be updated simply by clicking one button. Now, I don't want to go too far off down that route because we really just want to focus on cleaning data in this session, but that is why tables are so important. I'm going to show you a very quick pivot table just to show you how this works once we've cleaned up our data. So I've got my nice looking clean data set. I'm going to put it into a pivot table first of all. So from the table design ribbon that I'm currently clicked on in the tools group, I'm going to choose summarize with pivot table. So it's picked up my table range. Remember, it's called sales data, and I'm going to put this on a new worksheet. So let's click on OK. And here is my blank pivot table report. If you're not used to working with pivot tables, what it basically does is it imports all of the column headings of our data and puts them into this pivot table fields area. And we can see all of the column headings listed just here. We can then drag and drop these column headings into any of these areas to build a pivot table. And the cool thing about pivot tables is that they are completely dynamic. So if we don't like one analysis, we can simply change it by moving the fields around. So I could do a very quick analysis here. Let's do something like, let's go for country. Let's drag that into rows. And maybe I want to see the gross sales by country. So I'm going to drag gross sales into there. And now I have my pivot table. If I hadn't cleaned my data, I could have some very weird things going on in there. I could have blanks. The data might not be adding up correctly. It wouldn't look as tidy as it looked if I hadn't cleaned my data first. And it could be very confusing for anybody who's looking at this pivot table report. So really important to clean your data. Let's put it into a quick pivot chart so I can show you some of the differences. We are going to do a little bit of formatting here. I'm going to right click and we're going to go to value field settings because I want to tidy up these numbers just here. So if we go into number format, I'm going to apply a counting format to these numbers in the pivot table. I'm going to take the decimal places down. Let's click on OK and click on OK again to get those into a nicer format. So because I have a small data set here, I'm going to create a very quick pivot chart. But I don't want to include the grand total in my pivot chart, so I'm going to turn that off first of all. So let's go up to the Design tab, to Grand Totals, and I'm going to say, let's turn off grand totals for rows and columns. And now I can create a little pivot chart. And we'll just do a very basic column chart, like so, and we can add that into our worksheet. So this is all coming from our cleaned up data set. If we hadn't done any of that cleaning, this is not going to look as nice as it does. Now we could make this look a lot nicer. We could spend a lot more time formatting this. I am going to show you a couple of little tricks here, which I think are worthwhile. Once we get our pivot chart into here, in general, I tend to hide these gray filter buttons. So I'm going to right click and say hide all field buttons on charts. I like to keep my charts looking as clean as possible. In general, I remove everything that I don't need. So this legend here, which is showing the total, isn't really doing a great deal. So let's just delete that out. I'm going to display the actual values. So the gross sales, I'm going to display them above each of the bars instead of at the side here. So what we can do is right click, add data labels, and it's going to add those values, and I can then delete this axes just here. Again, we're trying to get this to look as clean as possible. Now, I still don't particularly like the way that this looks. I'm going to widen out these bars very slightly. If we right click and go to Format Data Series, I'm going to take the gap width down a little bit to make these bars wider. Well, what I could do is I could change the formatting on these numbers so that they say million as opposed to the full number just here. So this is a little bit of custom formatting to make everything look a little bit neater. And again, this is cleaning up a pivot chart that we've created. So it still sort of falls under that whole bracket of cleaning up our data and making things look as presentable as possible. So if we want to make any changes to the way that these numbers are formatted, if we go back to our pivot table, right click and go into value field settings and into number format, we can apply some custom number formatting of our own. So when we choose custom, we can type into here, and if we type £, comma, comma, and then type in an M, it's going to format it as 27M as opposed to 27, 000, 000. So it's a much neater notation when you're trying to present data in your charts. So we can put a £, 2 commas, and then M to represent millions. Let's click on OK and OK again. And you can see immediately this looks a lot neater. So that is just a little trick that you could possibly do if you want to make your charts look nice and clean. A little bit of custom formatting in there. Another thing we might want to do here is right click and we can format our data labels. And I'm going to choose to display these on the inside end of the bar. And I'm going to make them white and maybe bold. And then I can simply add my chart title. So this is, say, gross sales by country. And of course, we could do a lot more formatting here to make this look really nice and smart. If we open up this text file and just take a quick look at it, This is something, again, that you might get downloaded out of some kind of third-party system. And this is where we kind of have data, but it's not in a really great readable format. So I can see here that we have some column headings. We've got employee name, hire date, salary, department, job title. And these are separated by what we call a delimiter. And in this case, the delimiter is a semicolon. So a semicolon basically separates all of the fields throughout this data. So we're going to use that semicolon as our starting point to break up this data and bring it into Excel. So this is the data that we're going to use. Let's close down this file, because what we can do is we can directly import text files into Excel and then we can clean them up. So if we go up to File, all we need to do is go to Open, and then we just need to find our text file. So for me, if I go to the desktop, because this is where I have it stored. Now remember, if you're going from within Excel, Excel only shows by default files with a .xlsx extension. So what you might find you have to do is click on All Files to be able to see that text file just there. So I'm going to select the text file. Let's click on Open, and immediately Excel recognizes that this isn't an Excel file. It is a text file. So we need to tell Excel what to do with it. You can see here the text import wizard has opened. So the first thing it's asking us is the type of file that best describes this text file. And the top option is delimited. So it's saying, do we have characters such as commas or tabs separating each field? And we can see just below, we have a preview of our data. Now, if you remember, I said that we have delimiters, and the delimiter is the semicolon. That's what separates each of these fields. So we're going to keep it on delimited and click on Next. So now we need to tell Excel what delimiter is in use in our data set. So for us, that is a semicolon. Now I can choose that from here because we have it in our list. Now, as soon as I select semicolon, you can see that Excel knows where each of these columns breaks, because wherever we have a semicolon, that's where we have a new column. So this is looking pretty good. Let's click on Next. And I don't need to do anything here. I can click on Finish. And that is going to load that text file into Excel, and you can see it's broken it up into the correct columns. Now again, this is where data cleaning comes in. I can see straight away that I need to widen out these columns. So I'm going to select everything, double click to auto fit the contents. I can see in here, employee name, column A, I have people's names all in uppercase. Now, I actually don't want these names to display like that. I don't want it to say Juarez Jose. I want it to say Jose Juarez. And I also want it to be in proper case. So what I could do here is I'm going to insert another column, Control Shift plus. Now I could use text functions to do this, but that's going to take a lot of time. So instead, I'm going to do everything all in one go using Flash Fill. Now, when we're using Flash Fill, all we need to do here is tell Excel how we want the text to look. So I want it to look like this, Jose Juarez. So I'm switching those names around, and I'm also making them lowercase. Control Enter leaves us in the same cell. Control E invokes Flash Fill, and it copies that format down. Take a look at that. Such a magical little tool. Now, notice here it's also switched around the title, so we might just have to drag this across or retype it in. That's not too much of a problem. And then we can quickly delete out that first column. So much quicker. Now, there are two other ways that you can invoke Flash Fill. So let's take a look at both of those. I'm going to insert another column just here, Control Shift plus. And I want to make all of these lowercase. So again, I can use Flash Fill. I just need to tell it what the first one needs to look like. And then if I press Enter, as soon as I start to type the second one, can you see it ghosts down? So Flash Fill is recognizing the pattern that I want to apply. And now all I need to do is press Enter to accept that. So again, Flash Fill is amazing. And that's just two different ways that you can invoke it. Let's take a look at the final way. We're going to do the same thing, but this time with the job title, we're going to change these to lowercase, but we're going to use Flash Fill again. So we want intern in here, Control Enter, and we can go up to the data ribbon and we have the Flash Fill button just here. When we click it, it's going to copy that down. How simple is that? So it makes cleaning up your data a lot quicker and a lot easier. Flash fill is the magic little button. Once again, we can then go through tidying up what we need to tidy up. So I'm going to probably apply some currency formatting or accounting formatting to this particular column. I've got date formatting on here. We are pretty much good to go. The final thing to do is just Control T to put this into a table. And this is ready for analysis. Lots of little techniques that are going to come in really useful the next time that you analyze your data. Let's use Power Query to combine some files and clean up that data. So let's take a look at the data first of all. Now I've got a folder here and it's called Sales Data. If I open up this folder, I have two files in here, Sales Data for 2017 and Sales Data for 2018. Now, if I open up one of these files, you can see what we have in here. So we've got a date column, we've got an order ID column, we have a customer number column. This whole data set are basically trip sales for particular years, in this case 2017. So I can see the trip in here, I can see the salesperson, the trip price, and also the year. And the other file that I have in this folder is just the same file, it's just data for 2018. So maybe this is data for some kind of travel agency. And every year, a file for that year's sales gets dropped into this sales data folder. So what we want to make sure that we do is that when a new file gets added to this folder, all of the data and all of the analysis that we've done automatically updates. So we can do this by combining the files together and then making sure that we're linking to this particular folder. So that's quite complicated and quite a lot to get your head around. So let's take a look at it slowly. Now I'm going to close down this file and we're just going to start with a blank workbook. So what I'm going to do is we're going to jump up to the Data tab, and in the Get and Transform group, we're going to go to Get Data from File, and I'm going to say I want to get data from a folder because I want to include both of those files. The sales files for 2017 and 2018 are both in the sales data folder. So effectively what I'm doing here is I'm connecting to that particular folder. So let's say from folder. And now I need to select the folder. So I have mine stored on my desktop, and it's this one here, the sales data folder that contains those two sales data files. I'm just going to select the folder. Let's click on Open. And we're now creating a connection between Excel and that folder. You can see here, it's had a look in the folder and it can see Sales File 2017 and Sales File 2018. Those are the two files within that folder. So everything is looking good so far. Now at this stage, if we take a look at the bottom, we have a few different things we can do. We can choose to combine these files together. So if your files are exactly the same, and what I mean by that is they have the same structure, the same column headings, instead of having two separate files, you can simply have them all in one file that contains all of the data for 2017 and 2018. So you can do that, which is exactly what we're going to do. But if you wanted to, if you want to clean up your data or at least check your data to see if it needs to be cleaned up, we have a Transform Data button at the bottom. So let's click on Transform Data. Now this opens up Power Query. And if you've never been into Power Query before, this can look a little bit intimidating. But basically what we do in Power Query is exactly what we've just done with our Excel files. This is where we can come to clean up our data. And everything that we did manually in Excel, we can find in this Power Query editor. So we can do things like remove blank rows. We can split columns by delimiter. We can do a find and replace. We can change the formatting of each of the columns. There's lots of things that we can do. So this is just a more graphical way of doing those things. Now, the first thing I want to do here is I want to take these two files, 2017 and 2018, and I want to combine them together. So I just have one big long file. Now, a quick way of doing that from here is to click these two downward arrows, which will combine both of these files into one file. And again, this can take a few seconds, but it's going to show you a preview of what this is going to look like. That looks pretty good to me. Let's click on OK. So it's going to open up the contents of both of those files and basically combine them together in one big long file. And we can check that because if we check the source name column at the top, you can see it includes data for 2017 and 2018. So that is perfect. So now I have this here, I can go through, I can look at my data in my columns, and I can see if I need to clean anything up in Power Query. Now I'm going to put this data into a pivot table. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to decide if I need all of these columns. Do I need the source name column? Well, no. This is a column which has basically been added in by Power Query, which just tells me what the file name is. And I'm not really going to need that in any analysis that I do of this data. So let's get rid of it. We can right click and we can choose remove. Nice and straightforward. We can then go through and check to make sure that the data type we've selected for each of these columns is correct. So I have dates in this first column, and if I click the little calendar, this is where we can change or choose what type of data we have in this particular column. And I will say that most of the time, Power Query tends to get this correct. So this is a date and it's selected the correct format. Order ID, well, what have we got there? Well, this has chosen a whole number. Yep, that's fine. Customer, this is text. Yes, because it starts with text, so it's going to think that it's text. Trip is text, salesperson, so on and so forth. So these number formats are worth checking and changing if they are incorrect. Now, a couple of things that we can do to tidy up this data a bit better. If we take a look at this trip column, we can see here that we have a trip code, then we have a dash, and then we have the actual trip name. So if I'm thinking about analyzing this data using a pivot table, I might want to do a summary of the trip prices by the trip code. Now, currently I couldn't do that because I have the trip code and the trip name combined into one column. So what I'd probably do here is separate the trip code, have that in its own separate column, and then have the trip name in a separate column. So I basically want to split up this column. Now, again, we could do this in Excel by using something like Flash Fill, or we could use text to columns or something like that. In Power Query, this is so simple. We just simply select the column that we want to split up, and then on the Transform tab in Split Column, we can say by delimiter. And then we can just choose where we want to split it. So where we have the dash is where I want to split. So we have a few different options in here. If you can't see what you want, you can go to custom, and it's remembered it from when I last typed it in. We have a dash in there, click on OK, and it's going to split those into two columns. We can then rename these column headings. So double click, and I can call this trip code and this one name. And because I've split this column at the dash, there was a space either side of that dash. So I'm pretty sure that the trip name is now going to have an erroneous space at the beginning. But not to worry, because we can apply that trim function to this column. Remember, we used that before in Excel. I can select the column and we go to Format, and we have trim in here. Also notice we have the clean function in here. If we wanted to change to uppercase, lowercase, or capitalize, remember, again, we did that using Excel functions. In Power Query, we can simply select. So I'm going to choose the trim function, and I'm going to apply a trim to both of these columns that I just tidied up to remove any erroneous spaces. So those are a couple of things that you can do in Power Query to clean your data. Pretty much everything that we do in Excel, we can do in here. And then once we're happy with how our data looks, we can go to the Home tab, close and load, and I can load it directly into a pivot table. So let's go to close and load, and I'm going to say create me a pivot table report, click on OK. And it's going to bring all of that data in, and I can just choose my fields to analyze by. So maybe I want the trip name in the rows, the trip price down here. And there is my pivot table made up of 2017 and 2018 data. I have both in there. If I want to apply a filter by year, I can drag the year column up to filters, and then I can choose, if I'm just interested in 2017, I can choose that way. The final thing I want to show you is what happens when we want to add 2019's data to this pivot table. Now, because of the way that we've set this up, we created a connection between Excel and the folder. So what happens is when we add a new file to this folder, it's going to automatically refresh all of the pivot tables. So let's take a look at that. Maybe it's the end of the year, and I have a little file just here, and we have this file just here with our 2019 sales data. I'm going to copy this, Control C, and we're going to add it to the sales data folder. So there we go. There's the new data for the new year. I want this to be included in my analysis. So because we already have that connection there, I simply need to go back to the pivot table. All we need to do is click refresh. It will bring across that data. And you can see here, it has brought it across because we have 2019 listed in here. All right, so any tables or pivot charts that you have attached will automatically update just by clicking that refresh button. So that is an advantage of pulling your data into Power Query, cleaning it up in there, combining it, and creating that connection with a folder.
A big congratulations, everyone, for making it all the way to the end of this course. So it's just about time for me to sign off and say goodbye to you all. I hope you enjoyed running through this course as much as I've enjoyed teaching it to you. Once again, my name is Deb. Bye for now.
Hi, from everyone at Simon Says It. We hope you're enjoying this training lesson. Please like this video to show your support for the channel. If you want to take your learning further, earn a certificate for this course, and gain access to over 200 courses ad-free, click up there and go to simonsaysit.com. Thanks for watching, and back to the course.
We're going to be talking about a topic that, in my experience, confuses people a lot, and that is custom formatting. Now, the reason why it confuses people is because people tend to go into or open up custom formatting, and immediately they're confronted with this custom formatting dialog box with all of these weird symbols, these hash characters, these zeros, and it all looks a bit intimidating and doesn't really make much sense if you're not sure what you're looking at. However, it's not quite as intimidating as it first looks, and if you understand just a few basic principles, custom formatting becomes a really useful way of formatting numbers in a spreadsheet in a very specific way. We're going to look at a few different examples, but of course, there are hundreds and hundreds of different custom formats that you could potentially create. So don't think you're just limited to the ones that I'm going to show you today. This is just kind of a jumping off point for you. And then you can do some more reading, do some Googling, watch some YouTube videos. That's always what I recommend. So my name is Deborah Ashby. I'm a Microsoft MVP, course instructor, and content creator most recently, who's been using, training, and supporting Excel for about 20 years now. So we're just going to start out talking about what exactly is custom formatting. We're going to explain that so you understand what you're looking at, what you're doing, and why you might need to use it. I'm going to show you a basic formatting example, and then we'll delve just a little bit more into custom formatting so that you really understand what you're looking at. I'm going to show you some things like how you can hide zero values using custom formatting, how you can add text into your custom formats, and also the difference between those hash symbols and the zeros. I'm going to show you how you can use custom formatting to do things like change the color of values in your spreadsheet, and also how you can do condition-based formatting. I'm then going to show you a little bit of an example of how you can use custom formatting with conditional formatting, and also how you can use symbols in your custom formats as well. So we're going to start on example number 1. And you can see here, I've just got some small data sets that we're using today. Obviously, the same principles can be applied if you have a much larger data set, but I'm just keeping my data set small, so it's super easy for you guys to understand. Now, we're going to start out by just taking a look at some basic formatting. So in this first table, this is just a small table that's showing some sales agents, the sales that they've generated, and then if they've received any commission on those sales. And what I've said over here is that sales agents with less than 100,000 in sales get 0% commission. A little bit harsh, but you know, those are the rules. Sales agents with more than 100,000 in sales get a 20% commission. And we can see those values in the tables just here. Now, currently, the numbers that you see in these two columns, there's no formatting applied to these. I haven't gone in and applied any formatting. If you take a look on the home ribbon in this number group just here, you can see I just have the default general formatting applied, which is kind of no formatting really. So what I would probably do here is I would apply some formatting to these two columns in this table.
Now I'm going to do this by clicking the little diagonal arrow, which is going to open up the number format or the format cells dialog box and jump me straight to the number tab. Now, don't forget that there is a keyboard shortcut to jump directly to here. That keyboard shortcut is Control 1 is going to jump you to the same place. I find myself using that all the time, just as a little quick way of getting to where I need to be. This is where I can come to apply my custom formats. Now, looking at this data, I just want to have a comma in here, and I don't want any decimal places. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to number, and I'm going to say that I don't want any decimal places, but I do want to use a 1000 separator. So it's going to put a comma, you can see in the sample just above, and it's going to take the decimal places down to 0. So this is a very basic number format. It's not a custom format. This is a number format that I'm applying. You can also see underneath, I can choose how I want any negative numbers in my data to be displayed. Now, I don't have any negative numbers, so I'm not too concerned about this, but maybe one of these does change to a negative. I can choose how I want that to be formatted. So I'm just going to go with the top one for argument's sake, click on OK, and it's going to apply that formatting. You can see that comma separator. Now, the first thing that's really important to know when you're working with formatting is that formatting is simply a mask. Okay, so it doesn't affect, it doesn't change the underlying number. It just sits on top of the number to change the way that number looks. How do I know that? Well, if we click on this first cell just here, you can see that it's got the comma in the cell, but if you take a look in the formula bar, we still have that original number. It's not showing the formatting. It doesn't have a comma in there. And you'll find that with any formatting that you apply, it might look different in the cell, but the actual number underneath is exactly the same. So formatting won't affect the number underneath, which means you can still do formulas and things like that. And any formatting you apply isn't going to affect those formulas. Okay, so it's just a mask. Now, if we select these numbers again and press Control 1 to jump into format cells, if we go down to the custom option at the bottom, this is where all of our custom formatting lives. And this is generally, people open this up, they take one look at these things listed in here and think, nope, not for me, and then they leave. So this is what we're going to explain, so this area isn't quite as scary the next time you go to it. We applied comma separator formatting in the last example. Now, if I go down to custom, you can see in here what that actually represents in terms of how Excel views that formatting. So this code, it's not really code, but I'm going to call it code. This little thing here is a representation of the comma separated format. All right, you can see we have a hash symbol, comma, hash, hash, 0. Now I am going to explain what these hashes and these zeros mean a little bit later on, but just know that when you apply formatting, if you apply it from the home ribbon and come down to custom, you can see how Excel kind of represents that formatting underneath. This is the first really important thing that you need to know about, and this is positioning when it comes to custom formats. If we take a look in this list below, where we have all of these different things, I'm going to scroll all the way down. These are all presets that you can use, so you don't have to construct these yourself, but I'm going to go down to something that's super complicated, like this one just here. So this is a pretty complex custom format, and you're probably looking at this thinking, what on earth? To be honest with you, sometimes I look at these and think, what on earth is going on here? But this is really important because it's going to help you understand one of the fundamentals of custom formatting. Now, I don't know if you can see, but this whole string is actually made up of 4 different parts, and each part is separated by that little semicolon in the middle. So can you see a semicolon just there? I've tried to highlight it. There's another one over here. It's really hard to highlight. There we go. Another one just there, and there's another one just there. So effectively, everything before the first semicolon is one part, everything here is another part, everything here is another part, and everything here is another part. Now, what do I mean by parts? What does that mean? So this is what these different parts mean. So if you're looking at a custom format, there are certain positions that mean different things. So everything before that first semicolon in position 1, that tells us how any positive values in the selected range or column are going to be formatted. So that's our formatting for positive numbers. In position 2, that tells us how any negative values in the range that we've selected are going to be formatted. Position 3, that tells us how 0 values are going to be formatted. So if you have zeros in cells, what are they going to look like? And then in position 4, that's where we specify how we want text in a cell to be formatted. Okay, so don't worry too much about all the hashes and @ signs and things like that. Just get set on these different positions. You have positive, negative, 0 values, and text, and they're all separated with a semicolon. So if we go back to here, for example, let's select this column just here where we have some 0 values. If I press Control 1 again and go down to Custom, what do you think would happen if I added in something else into this custom format? So we've just learned that what's in position 1 is how our positive values are going to be formatted. Now, all of the values in the highlighted range are positive values. And this is the formatting that we have applied. This is our comma separated format. So maybe I want to say that if I have any negative values in this column or in this selected range, I want them to be formatted in exactly the same way as the positive values, but I just want a minus symbol on the front. How do you think I might do that? Well, we can simply copy this formatting. I'm going to put in my semicolon, which tells me I'm moving on to my second position, how negative numbers are formatted. I'm going to put a minus in there, and I can just paste in that format. So effectively, I've defined there my positive values and my negative values. And they're both the same format, it's just negative have a dash in front. So pretty simple when you break it down like that. Now, what about if I add a semicolon on the end? That moves us across to the third position, which is how 0 values are going to be formatted. Now, notice that I do have some 0 values in column C. But what if I don't add anything in there? What do you think is going to happen? If I click on OK, it's actually going to hide those 0 values. All right, but because remember, formatting is simply a mask, the value still exists in the cell, it's effectively just hidden from view. And this is kind of something I use quite often. Sometimes you don't want to display zeros or a dash if you have a blank cell. You still want the value to remain, you just want to hide it from view. You could do that. And because the value still exists, it means that we can still perform calculations. So I could go into the next cell and I could do this cell just here, which looks like it's blank, add 20, and the formula is still going to work because effectively there is still a value there. All right. So just start getting your head around the different positions within custom formatting. Now, what about instead of having a blank in here, I want it to say no commission instead. How are we going to add text into here? Well, let's select our cell range again, Control 1. Now, remember, in the last example, we didn't have anything in this third position. So now, all I would need to do is simply add a piece of text, what I want it to say. Now, remember, in Excel, every time you want to add text in, it needs to go in quote marks. So I'm just going to say no commission. I think I've spelled that right. So now we have no commission in that third position, and the third position tells us how we're formatting 0 values. Okay, click on OK, and it's going to put no commission in those cells. And again, if we widen out this column, you'll notice something very interesting, because the general rule in Excel is that when we have a value in a cell, it's always aligned to the right-hand side of the cell, whereas text is normally aligned to the left. Now, if I just typed no commission into the cell, this would be aligned over to the left, and Excel would recognize this as a text cell. But because we've used custom formatting, and again, the formatting is just a mask on top, really, we still have the value in the cell. It's aligned to the right because it's effectively still a value, and it means that we can still perform calculations on the cell. A lot of the time, you're going to struggle to perform calculations on columns that contain text and values in the same column. All right, so this is one of the biggest advantages of using custom formatting is that you can change the way things look, but you can still use formulas and calculations. Okay, hopefully that makes sense to everybody. Now, what about if, let's take a look at something else. Let's do Control 1. Now, what about if I was to delete everything out of here and just put in 3 semicolons? What do you think that's going to do? Click on OK. It's going to hide everything in those cells. But again, if we click on the cell, if you look in the formula bar, the values still exist underneath. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, why on earth would I want to do that? And I'll tell you, I use this so often. It's really helpful and useful in situations more than you would think, because sometimes there's things that you want to actually hide on your spreadsheet, but you don't want to maybe remove the formula, or you don't want to remove the value from the cell. So just custom format it, add in 3 semicolons, and you're effectively hiding it from view. Okay, so I find this really useful. I'm sure there's many situations you can think of where that would also be useful. So I think we're at a stage now where we should probably start talking through what exactly these pound symbols and these zero symbols are, or zero value, I should say. Now, the thing you have to think of these are, they are placeholders. Okay, so they're 2 different kinds of placeholders for numbers. So the hash symbol or the pound symbol, whatever you call that, is a variable placeholder, whereas the 0 is a fixed placeholder. So zeros are generally used for decimal places. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, I'm still not sure about that. Let's take a look at an example so you can see the difference between the two. I'm going to cancel out of here, and we're going to move down to our example at the bottom here. Now, I have a little order number table. We have a list of order numbers in column A. We have a list of products in column B, the customer in column C, and the sales in column D. Now, if you take a look at these order numbers, these look a little bit strange. In general, you wouldn't see order numbers that look like this. Most of the time, order numbers have some type of consistency in the length, how many characters there are. So maybe all of my order numbers need to be 5 characters long. Now, I don't want to go in and start changing these numbers and start trying to add zeros on the front here, because this is order number 100. If I want this to be 5 characters long, I can't add numbers onto the end, because that would make it order 10,000 or 100,000. And if I try and add zeros onto the beginning, we all know that Excel doesn't particularly like numbers with zeros on the beginning, so that's not going to work too well either. So I could use custom formatting to add a level of consistency to these order numbers. So let's do it using the pound symbol first of all, and then we'll do it using the 0 symbol. So I'm going to select these order numbers, Control 1. Let's go to custom. Currently, we just have general formatting applied to these numbers, but what I'm going to do here is I'm going to type in, I want these to be 5 characters. So let's type in 5 pound symbols. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, what's going to happen if I do that? Absolutely nothing, because those are variable placeholders. Nothing is fixed about those pound symbols. Okay, so it's just going to keep these the length that they are, because it can vary. It doesn't matter. They're not fixed places. Whereas if we press Control 1 and we change these hash symbols to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 zeros and click on OK, because those are fixed, we get the zeros in here, okay? And this is pretty much exactly what I want. It's added in zeros wherever they're needed. So the bottom one here, we didn't need any zeros. It was already 5 characters. But the first one up here, we needed a couple of zeros on the front there to make it consistent, but it's still order number 100. Okay, so those symbols, one is a variable placeholder, the other is a fixed placeholder. And I will say, this is kind of the thing that used to confuse me most about custom formatting, knowing when to use a pound symbol and when to use a 0. I still get it wrong occasionally. A lot of the time it's trial and error. And the good thing with custom formatting is you do get this little sample at the top here. So as you start adding in zeros, you can sort of see it change above. So if it doesn't look right, you think, oh, okay, I'll use a hash symbol or a pound symbol instead. That's kind of the way I do it. It's always trial and error with Excel. Hopefully that explains it or makes it a little bit clearer for you, though.
let's move on to our next example. And we're going to move on to the sales column just here. Now, currently in here, I have unformatted numbers. And you'll notice that for some of these, we have minus values in here. Now, what I'm going to say is that where we have a minus value, these people have placed their order using a voucher. And I want to kind of represent that fact that they've used a voucher in the cell. So I kind of want it to say voucher next to the number. Now, in general, you shouldn't really combine text and values in one cell. And the reason why we say that is because you then can't perform calculations. So let me show you what I mean. So with this minus 50, maybe I look at this and think, okay, I'm going to go up to the formula bar. I'm going to add in the word voucher like that. Hit enter. It looks a little bit strange. If I widen out this column, you can also see that Excel now thinks that this is a text cell. Because we've got the word voucher in there, it's the first thing in the cell, Excel thinks, okay, this cell contains text. But there is a value in here which we might want to use in a calculation. So maybe I want to add a total. If I do Alt equals, can you see it stops where we have text because it can't find any more numbers? Now I could drag this up to include those cells and hit enter. It's going to give me 632, which is actually the wrong answer because of this cell just here. All right. So just adding text into cells isn't the way to go about this. So let's undo all of this. Let's take it back to how it was. Now, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to use custom formatting. So we're going to select our cell range, Control 1. Let's go to custom. Now, this time I'm going to use that formatting that we used at the beginning. So I want to have comma separated value in there. So this is going to be my positive values. Now, what if I want to include a currency symbol? So maybe I want a dollar symbol on the front here. Well, it's as simple as adding that into the custom formatting. So I'm going to go to the start here and I'm just going to add in the dollar symbol. And you can see in the sample above what that's going to look like. So now we have our positive values. That's how they're going to be formatted. I want my negative values to have the word voucher on them, but I also want this same formatting for the number. So I'm going to press semicolon. We're now working with our negative values. And on the front, I want the word voucher. And I'm going to put space dash space like so. And then I can specify the formatting I want for the number, which is going to be the same as what we did previously. So I'm going to type in dollar symbol. We're going to have hash, comma, hash, hash, 0. So let's do that. And now that's exactly how I want it to look. And if I make this column wider, notice that Excel still sees this as a number cell. It doesn't see it as a text cell any longer. So it means that I can safely perform calculations. If I do Alt equals, it's going to select the entire range, hit enter, and now I get the correct answer. Okay, so that is the correct way. If you want to combine text with a value in a cell, use custom formatting to do it. Maybe let's liven this up a little bit and change the color of the minus values as well. So where we have voucher and then the minus value, we want these to show in red so they really stand out in the table. So once again, we can select Control 1, and we're just going to make a quick change to our custom formatting. Now, if you want to use formatting to change the color of different things, this is so simple. You just need to put the color inside square brackets. And obviously, you need to put it in the correct position in custom formatting. So because I only want the negative values to be in red, I need to make sure that I'm working with position number 2, where we have our negative values. So I'm moving to the start of what we have in that second position. I'm going to open a square bracket and I'm simply going to type the word red, and then I'm going to close the square bracket. Click on OK. It is as simple as that. So hopefully you're sort of starting to see how these custom formats can be constructed. What about if I want to make all of the positive values in here green? Well, let's select Control 1. Now, a little tip for you here, if you want to use green for this kind of thing, and this applies to when you're doing things like custom formats and conditional formats, things like that. If I was to type at the beginning here, green, because we want to format the positive values in green, the green that Excel produces by default is actually really hideous. Let me show you. It's like neon. It's really hard to read. I'm sure people who have accessibility issues are not going to enjoy this at all. So let me show you a much, much nicer green that's easier on the eyes for anything like this. Let's control 1 again. Replace green with color 10. So Excel has these other things aside from red, blue, green, yellow, all of the standard colors. It does have a color palette of colors that are called color 1, color 2, color 3, all of those kinds of things. So color 10 is actually a really nice green. And I use this all the time. Whenever I need a green in Excel, this is what I'll use. So when we do that, we get a much nicer green, which blends in a bit nicer with that heading row as well. So hopefully this is starting to make a little bit more sense. Now, here we have a very small table. Again, we have some employees, and maybe they've just had their appraisals and they've been given a job rating, but from 1 to 10. So anybody, these are our little rules just here, all staff or any staff who have a job rating of 7 or higher are going to get a thumbs up emoji. Any staff with a job rating of 7 or under are going to get a thumbs down emoji. So this is how you can basically use logic and emojis in your custom formats as well. So don't think you're just limited to changing the color or changing the actual format of the number. You can incorporate other things in here as well. This is logical. So if you're used to using Excel and you're used to using things like if statements, this is kind of like an if statement. We're sort of saying if the employee has a job rating of greater than or equal to 7, then we're going to give them a thumbs up emoji. But instead of doing an if formula, we're going to use a custom formatting to put these emojis in. So there should be a couple of things that you've never seen before in this. So let's select these numbers, Control 1. All right, let's go down to custom formatting and we're going to click in here and we're going to delete out general. Now what we're going to do this time is we're going to add our logic into here as opposed to particularly specifying positive and negative values because we have positive values in here. So what we need to do if you want to add logic as a custom format is we're going to open a bracket and our first piece of logic is staff with a job rating of 7 or higher. So what we want to say here is everyone who has a job rating of greater than or equal to 7, that needs to go in quote marks. We want to apply a thumbs up emoji. So how on earth do we do that? Well, an emoji needs to go in quote marks. And then what you can do is on your keyboard, if you press the Windows key and then period or full stop, whatever you prefer, it's going to pop open the Windows emoji gallery. And you can go in here and you can search for different things. You can see mine are here because I was practicing this earlier. I want the thumbs up emoji. If I click it, it's going to put that into my custom formatting behind. Now, one thing to note, which is probably very obvious, you're not going to get this really cool looking colored emoji. You're going to get the black and white version. Now, if you're doing this using Excel Online as opposed to the desktop version that I'm using, you will get the full color version. In the desktop version, you just get the little black outline. But it's good enough for what we want to do here, when you need to put that in quotes. We then need to press semicolon, and then we're going to put in our second piece of logic. So we want to open a bracket, and this time we're going to say anything that is less than 7, we want that to be a down thumb emoji. So again, we're going to press Windows key, period or full stop. I'm going to choose this one and we're going to close the quote marks. So when we click on OK, that's exactly what we should have. So you can see here we've got some downward pointing thumbs and we've got some upward pointing thumbs.
Now, the really important thing to remember here is that these are still values. Again, if you look in that formula bar, I keep reiterating this point, but it's so important. Those emojis are simply a mask that is slapped over the top of the value. The value still remains the same. So again, if I wanted to do calculations, I mean, I'm not sure why I would want to add up the job ratings, but just in this example, we could, if we wanted to, do equals sum, and we could add up all of these and hit enter, and it's going to give us a thumb emoji because I have formatting applied to that cell. But hopefully, if I change this back to general, it's going to give us the answer. Okay, so just remember that it's such an important point. Doesn't matter what's applied over the top, the number is still underneath. Now, what if I wanted to change these thumbs to different colors? Well, again, if I select this cell range, Control 1, and go up to here, I can simply add the colors on the front. So again, we can just go to the front of this one, and maybe I want the thumbs up to be that nice green. So let's say color 10. Just add it on the front. It's really, really simple once you know some basic rules. And then for this one, I just want the standard red in there. Click on OK, and now we get those little different colored emojis. Now we can also combine this with conditional formatting. So this is sort of just showing you a little bit of conditional formatting as well as custom formatting. You combine these two together to give a really nice effect. Maybe now, based on the icon, the emoji that I have in the cell, maybe I want to highlight all of the rows that contain red thumbs down and all the rows that have a green thumbs up. So what we can do is we can select our cell range. We can go to conditional formatting, and we need to apply a new rule. So we're going to say use a formula to determine which cells to format. And if you want to highlight the entire row based on a condition, let me show you how you do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to type in equals. I'm going to select the column that contains the emoji. Now, with conditional formatting, notice it's going to put in an absolute reference. Okay. Now, what we want to do is we always want our formatting to apply to column B. So we want column B to be fixed, but we want it to run across the rows. So we don't want the row to be fixed. So we need to change this referencing so we're fixing the column, but not the row. If we kept that as an absolute reference, when we apply the conditional formatting, it's only going to apply to cell B4 and nothing else. Okay, so we need to make it mixed referencing. So what we're going to say then is if the cell in B4 is a thumbs down emoji, we can't do that. Okay, so in this instance, we still have to use the number that's laying underneath in order to perform this logical test. Okay, so don't be fooled by that. Even though we have an emoji in the cell, we can't use it in the logic. So I'm going to have to say here, if the value in cell B4, and our first piece of logic was if the value is greater than or equal to 7. And then we can choose format, and then we can go into fill, and we can choose what we want to fill that with. Okay, so if what we have in cell B4 is greater than or equal to 7, it's going to highlight the row. So let's click on OK, and you can see there it is. All right, so again, conditional formatting helps us highlight a couple of really important points when it comes to custom formatting. Again, we are using the value in the underlying cell and not what we can see in here. Pretty straightforward. Now I'm going to undo. And just to show you, because we haven't really spoken about it too much, most of the time we've been working in this session on positive, negative, and zero values. We haven't really touched on that fourth position, and that is text values in cells. So let's just keep using this little table just here, because in this first column, in column A, I only have text. I don't have numbers. So if I wanted to use custom formatting on a column that contains text, when I press Control 1 and go to custom, I could build out my formatting this way. So what I could say here is I'm going to choose this formatting. So for positive values, I could say that I want them to look like this. Remember, that's just the standard formatting with comma separator. Or I could add a pound symbol in the front if I wanted them formatted with a currency symbol. Semicolon, I could then specify how I want my negative values to look. So I'm going to say I want them to be with a minus in front, then the dollar symbol, and then we want the formatting, comma, 0. Now, if I don't want any formatting applied, or I just want a blank where we have 0 values, which is what we have in the third position, I can simply press another semicolon, which is going to jump over. Remember, if we don't specify anything, 0 values, it's going to return a blank cell. So now we're on to that fourth position, and this is where we can specify how we want any text in the selected cell range to look. So maybe I just want the text to be red. I could simply open a square bracket and add red on the end. So when I click on OK, you can see that's exactly what it does because we have nothing but text in here. What if I was to change this cell to a 0? What's going to happen? We get a blank because that's what we specified in the custom formatting. What about if I enter a number in here? So maybe 500, 1,000. Let's hit enter. It's going to format it as I've specified in the custom formatting. We have a comma separator and we have a currency symbol. What about if I enter a minus? So let's just say minus 30. We get exactly what we specified. So that should show you everything for each position in custom formatting. And I have a very small data set. You could be using a much larger data set. That is absolutely fine. But let's pretend that we are selling skincare to the masses. And you can see here in column A, I have the skincare products that I'm selling. And then maybe this column is the actual quantity of each that I've sold. And this is my target. So maybe I'm working for those MLM type people, where people sell on skincare products, things like that. So maybe they've given me a target. This is how much I should be selling each week. And this is what I've actually sold down here. So what I want in this column is I want to see what the difference is between the actual and the target, and I want to use custom formatting to represent these figures. Now, the first thing we need to do here is we need to add a formula into the cell, which is basically going to be the actual minus the target. So if we do equals, we're going to do actual minus target. So now when I double click to copy that down, you should see here the variance is minus 19. So my target for selling moisturizer was 76, but I actually only sold 57 bottles of moisturizer. I'm a very disappointing salesperson. So I'm down by 19. This one, my target was 61 bottles of serum, and I actually sold 61. So there's 0 variance just there. And for some of these, you can see I did a little bit better. So the target was actually 51 and I sold 75. So I really know how to sell eye makeup remover. So we have those values in the cell just here. And what we want to do is just make these look a little bit more interesting. And we're going to do that by applying custom formatting. So let's do Control 1 and we're going to jump straight down to custom. So we're going to start with positive values. And if we look at our numbers that we have selected here, you can see that in here we have a mixture of positive values, negative values, and 0 values. So let's deal with positive and negative first of all. So how do we want our positive values to look? Well, I want these to be in green. So I'm going to use my nice color 10. That's the first thing that goes in there. Now I want to define how I want the symbol to look, because I want to have a symbol in there, which is a little up arrow. Now, this might look confusing first of all, but just bear with me, trust the process. We're going to put a 0 in here. And the 0 means fixed, remember? Now, if you look at the data that we have selected, you can see that we have some 0 values, or effectively we have in this variance column, we have numbers that have 1 character. So this 0 has 1 character. Minus 3 is basically 1 character if you don't count the minus. Now, if I was to put 2 zeros in here, when I apply the custom formatting, it's going to change all these 0 values to 2 zeros. Whereas if I just keep 1 0 in here, that's kind of like the minimum character that we have in here. So we need 1 0, okay? We then need to open quote marks, and I'm going to add in a symbol. So I'm going to press space because I want a space in between the number in the cell and the symbol. Now I want an up arrow symbol. So how do I put a symbol in when I'm working within this custom format or this format cells dialog box? Well, we have some cool little keyboard shortcuts we can use. So if you want an up arrow, which is what I want here for positive values, if you press Alt 30 on your keyboard, it's going to give you that nice little tidy black up arrow. Going to close the quotes. Now look at the sample just above. That's telling me what it's going to look like in the cell. And that's pretty much what I want it to look like. I want it to have the value, in this case, minus 19, with an up arrow. Okay, let's press semicolon. So in that second position, I want to have down arrow for any negative values. So we're going to type in square bracket, and I want these to be red. Close the square bracket. And we're basically going to follow the formatting along. This is what I always generally tend to do, is I kind of follow the formatting that's gone previously. So I'm going to have a 0. We're going to open a quote mark. I want a space in there because I don't want the symbol right next to the number. I want a little bit separated. And then we're going to input a down facing arrow. And the keyboard shortcut for this is Alt 31. Close the quote marks. Now, if I was to just leave it like this, I've basically only specified what I want it to look like for positive and negative values. So let's click on OK. You can see what that looks like. Now, that's fine. It looks really neat. And this is what people liked about this most, but it just looks really tidy. Like you could do something similar with icon sets. So you can see we've got some icon sets in here, but icon sets look pretty rubbish, if I'm honest, when you have them in cells. This is a much nicer, tidier looking, more professional way of doing this type of formatting. That's why I generally prefer it over things like icon sets. Now I can see here there is one more thing I do want to change. So where we have 0 values, where the target and the actual are exactly the same, I don't want these to show with a green and with an up arrow because these are the same. There's no variance just here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in something into this third position. Remember, the third position is how we're formatting 0 values. So I just want a line, and I want that line to be purple. Now, let's press semicolon. And this time, if you want a nice purple, we're going to use color 13. That's quite a nice purple. Let's close the bracket. And I'm going to follow the format on. So I want to put a 0. We need a fixed decimal. I'm going to open a quote mark, press space, and then if you just want a line, we need to use the keyboard shortcut Alt 22. It looks like a block when you put it into here. It looks more like a line when it's actually in the cell. So we're going to close the quote marks just there. So now we have positive, negative, and 0 values covered. Click on OK. And you can see what that looks like. And I think that looks really nice. And if you wanted to, you could position these so that they were more in the center, like that. In fact, I don't actually like those in the center. I'm going to put those back over to the side. And the cool thing about this is that everything is dynamic, so it will update if the data changes. So if I was to change this to 50, for example, you can see it updates. If I was to change this one to 100, that's going to update as well. A big congratulations, everyone, for making it all the way to the end of this course. So it's just about time for me to sign off and say goodbye to you all. I hope you enjoyed running through this course as much as I've enjoyed teaching it to you. Once again, my name is Deb. Bye for now.
Hi, from everyone at Simon Says It. We hope you're enjoying this training lesson. Please like this video to show your support for the channel. If you want to take your learning further, earn a certificate for this course, and gain access to over 200 courses ad-free, click up there and go to simonsaysit.com. Thanks for watching, and back to the course.
Charts really are an important part of Excel, particularly these days as analyzing and visualizing data becomes a more and more sought after skill. Everybody's creating dashboards, charts, visualizations. It's very popular at the moment. My name is Deborah Ashby, and I'm a Microsoft IT trainer. I've been a trainer for about 16 years now, and I've worked in the wider IT industry for about 27 years. So I've pretty much seen Excel evolve from a fairly basic application in the 1990s to the very complex product that it is today. We're going to start out with choosing the right chart. I'm going to speak very briefly about the difference between Excel charts and pivot charts in case you have any confusion with regards to those two. And then we're basically going to dive in and start creating some charts. And I'm going to show you some formatting tips and tricks that hopefully you are maybe unfamiliar with or have never used before. So we're going to start out with everybody's favorite, a clustered column chart. I'm going to show you some formatting that you can do to make it look really cool. I'm going to introduce you to something called Power Toys in Excel. This is going to help you when it comes to if you have specific colors that you want to use in your charts. I'll speak more about that when we get to it. We're going to do things like add slicers. I'm going to show you how to customize them again so they really look and feel part of your chart. We're going to talk about line charts. Again, I'm going to show you some formatting tips and tricks. We're going to take a look at how we can apply custom formatting to the chart axes. We're then going to move on to a stacked column chart. And this is really cool because I'm going to show you how you can build a conditional stacked column chart that basically changes color depending on what's going on elsewhere in the spreadsheet. And also how you can add a moving target line, which updates again if values change in the spreadsheet. And then we're going to end with map charts because these can be really cool. They do have a little bit of a drawback. So we're going to talk through that and I'm going to show you some tricks when it comes to putting together a map chart as well. Not all chart types are suitable for your data. And I've just got a little example here just to illustrate that. So we have a very small data set just here, 4 different fruits, and we just have some prices for those fruits. And I've basically used this tiny data set and created 4 charts. And these are really 4 of the most popular charts you see people using in their spreadsheets. So we have a pie chart, a column chart, a line chart, and a bar chart. And let's just take a moment to take a look at the different ways that these charts are displaying this data. Now, if we take a look at the 2 charts that are on the left-hand side, so for example, the pie chart and the line chart, these 2 really aren't great at displaying the data that we have. If you have values in your data set that are reasonably close together, like I do here, there's not too much of a difference between any of these prices, it makes it quite hard to determine which is the highest price, which is the lowest price, just by looking at the pie chart. We could start adding things like data labels to make it really obvious, but it's particularly hard for me to tell which one is larger out of this yellow segment and the pink segment. They both look reasonably similar. Whereas if we have a look at the same data but displayed in a column chart on the right-hand side, we can instantly see which one of those has the highest price and which one has the lowest price. So the column chart on first glance is a lot easier to interpret than maybe the pie chart. Also with a pie chart, if you have a lot more data points, so I only have 4 items I'm showing in here, but if I had like 20 things that I wanted to display in my chart, the pie chart segments start to get really small and your chart can get really confusing, and it's just not a great way to display larger data sets. I'm going to explain to you a bit later on exactly what pie charts are good for, but for this type of data, not so great. The same thing with this line chart. If we take a look at this line chart is really showing me nothing. We've basically got our fruits running across the bottom. We've got the prices, and it's just showing me sort of these prices go down depending on the fruits. Now, this isn't really telling me anything insightful at all. And that is because line charts are generally best for time-based data. So what I mean by that is if instead of item and price, maybe I had the amount of fruit that's sold between a specific period, so maybe January to December of 2022. Because I have a time element in my data, I could then use a line chart and it's going to display it a lot better. So line charts are better for time-based data that changes, okay? So again, this isn't really suitable for this type of data.
Now, the other chart that we have here is the bar chart. And again, this would be suitable for this kind of data. A bar chart is basically just a flipped round version of the column chart. And you'll find that for a lot of your data sets that you're going to use, the column and the bar chart, they are good all-rounders. I always say, if in doubt, use a column or a bar chart. They do suit most types of data. Okay, the chart that you choose is really important when it comes to how effective the message of your data. Now, how do I know that my data is in a table? Well, there's a couple of ways that I can tell. The main one and the easiest way to tell is if you take a look at your ribbons running across the top, notice that we have a table design contextual ribbon. If my data wasn't in a table, I wouldn't be able to see this ribbon up here. You can also see I have these filter drop downs. Those automatically get applied when we convert our data set into an Excel table. Now, if you're not sure how to convert data to a table, you simply click in it, press Control T. I can't do it because I'm already in a table, and it's going to just ask you if your data has headers. Click on OK, and it's going to format your data as a table. What is the point of doing that? Why do we put our data into an Excel table before we analyze it? Well, the reason is most data sets aren't static. Most data sets will change over time. So I'm probably going to want to add more records into the bottom of this data set. Now, if I have my data in a table, one of the good things about tables is that they auto expand and will accommodate any new data that we add into the bottom. So consequently, if I've built a chart off of this table data, it's automatically going to include anything new that I add. I just need to refresh the chart. I don't need to sort of go in and start messing around with cell references. So my first tip is always put your data set into an Excel table before you put it into a chart, because it's going to be a lot easier for you when it comes time to update it. That moves me on to my next point, the difference between Excel charts, I should say, and pivot charts. We can create an Excel chart off of any data set. So for example, if I go back here, this small data set isn't in an Excel table. If I click in it, I'm not getting the table design ribbon, but I can still create a chart based off of this data set. So I can go to Insert. I have all of my chart options just here. I can open up and go to All Charts, and I can select any of these and create a chart. Whereas with a pivot chart, you need to create that based off of pivot table data. So your data needs to be in a pivot table first of all, in order for you to create a pivot chart. So you do have two slightly different chart types there, and we do use them in slightly different ways. Now, in this first example, we're going to build a clustered column chart off of pivot table data. So I'm going to take the data that I have here. It's already in a table. We're now going to create ourselves a pivot table. And we're going to put it over here on the Column Chart 1 tab. So because I have my data in a table, I can go up to Table Design, and we have a Summarize with Pivot Table option just here. So let's click it. I'm going to put my pivot table on an existing worksheet, and that existing worksheet is Column Chart 1, and I'm going to put it just here in cell B3. Let's click on OK. So now I have my empty pivot table. I'm going to build a very, very simple pivot table because we don't want to start cluttering up our charts too much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the market field and I'm going to drop it down into rows. And then we're going to grab the sales field and we're going to drop it into values. So what I'm looking at here is all of my data summarized by the market. So this is sort of like the region, and that's the total sum of sales for those particular markets. Now, before I create my pivot chart, I'm just going to do a little bit of formatting to this pivot table. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the number formatting so this looks a little bit better. So let's right click, number format, and I'm going to apply a counting format with 0 decimal places, like so. And I'm also going to remove the grand total because I don't want the grand total to be included in the chart when I create it. So let's jump up to the Design tab, go over to Grand Totals, and we're going to turn off for rows and columns. Lovely. So now my data is pretty much ready for me to create a pivot chart. So we're going to click in the data, up to Pivot Table Analyze. In the Tools group, we have Pivot Chart. So this is going to open your entire charts gallery. And this is what I mean. We have so many different chart types that we can choose from in here. And each of these chart types, each of these different categories also has numerous other variations of that particular chart. For example, in the line chart category, I could create a basic line chart, or I could create one that has markers. I can create a 3D line chart, so on and so forth. The donut chart, which is also a very popular chart that people like to use, is underneath pie. It's this one just here. It's basically a pie chart. It's just got a hole in the middle. Now, this leads me on to my first little tip here, and that is when you are creating charts of any kind, stay well away from the 3D version of anything. 3D charts are just really not great at allowing people to judge exactly what the values are represented in that chart. You can see this one, the perspective is all a bit off. It's very difficult to sort of be able to tell which segments are larger because of the perspective and the 3D element. So my advice to you, stay away from 3D charts. I'm sure there is a use for them in some industries, but in general, as a rule, stay away from them. As I mentioned before as well, with pie charts, I generally tend to like to stay away from pie charts, except if I have a very, very tiny data set. And when I say a tiny data set, I mean really comparisons between maybe 2 or 3 things. So for example, if I was analyzing a data set, maybe it was an HR data set, and I wanted to see how many male versus female people there were working at the company, I might use a pie chart for that because it's just 2 things that I'm comparing, male and female. And it's quite good for comparing 2 things together. It gives you a really good result. But anything more than that, I generally tend to stay away from pie and donut charts. Again, it's completely personal preference. That's just my feeling when it comes to pie charts. Use them with small amounts of data. Now, the chart that we're going to be creating is a column chart, and we're just going to start out with everyone's favorite, the good old clustered column chart. Let's select it, click on OK. Now, when you enter a chart, or a cluster column chart in this case, it's going to look like this. Now, it's displaying our data. It doesn't particularly look the best. It's not the most attractive thing in the world. We can definitely improve this by doing a little bit of formatting and tidying it up a little bit. Because what we're going to aim for is I want it to go from this, what we have on the screen, to something that looks like that. So this looks a lot better. It's also interactive. I can click on these little filters at the top here and the data changes depending on what I've selected. So this is a much more attractive looking chart than the one that we get when we first add it onto our spreadsheets. So lots of little tricks that we're going to use in order to recreate what we've just seen. Now, when you're looking at a chart or thinking about formatting a chart like this, the first thing you really need to think about is what data is absolutely necessary for people to know. People just want to be able to look at the chart and immediately be able to understand and interpret what it's displaying. So you want to try and make your chart as clean as possible. You want to remove from it anything that's not necessary to convey the message. So if I'm looking at this particular chart, the first thing that stands out to me is the legend. The legend, it just says total. I don't need it because I can already see the totals depicted in the chart. So this would be the first thing that I would get rid of. Now remember, with these different chart elements, they are just text boxes, so you can simply select them and press the delete key. Alternatively, you click the plus, go to legend, and you can just deselect legend to remove that from the chart. So that is the first thing that I would get rid of. The next thing I would probably remove from this chart are these grey buttons that you can see just here. Now, this one at the bottom acts as like a little filter. So if I wanted to filter specifically for different markets, I could use that. But in general, if I'm going to apply a filter to a chart, I'm probably more likely to filter on the pivot table as opposed to the actual chart. So I'm going to remove all of the grey buttons on here, again, to make this chart look a little bit cleaner. So we can right click and we can select hide all field buttons on chart, which is just simply going to get rid of those. So we're looking a little bit less cluttered now. What else do we want to do to this chart? Well, one thing I might want to do is I can see here, if I select all of the columns, These are representing the different markets. They're quite thin columns at the moment. Maybe I want these to be a bit chunkier, particularly if I'm going to add data labels where I have the actual value displayed within the bar. At the moment, this bar isn't wide enough to accommodate any of these sales values, so I'm going to make these a little bit wider. Now, when you're doing things like this, you have lots of chart formatting options available on the ribbons. Notice we now have a pivot chart analyze ribbon, a design ribbon, and a format ribbon at the top. So loads of options for formatting our chart. We can also find additional options in the right-click menu. So I can right-click on any part of the chart and I get more options in here. And these are very contextual. So what you see in this right-click menu really depends on what part of the chart you're clicked on. So currently I'm clicked on the columns. If I was to click down here in the data labels and right-click, I get a different set of results. Okay, so you have formatting options in the right-click menu. And of course, you have your formatting pane as well. And we can bring that up by selecting whatever it is that we want to format, in this case, the columns, and pressing Control 1 to open Format Data Series on the right-hand side. So when we open Format Data Series, check out what we have here underneath Series Options. We have an option to adjust the gap width. Now, this is going to adjust the gap in between each of these bars. So effectively, I can make these skinnier, like so, or I can drag it down and I can make these bars a little bit fatter. And again, as I said, if you're thinking of putting your actual data labels inside these bars, you want to make sure that they're wide enough to accommodate whatever values you have. So I think I'm going to leave mine like that. So now that we've done that, I'm going to go in and I'm going to add some data labels. We can right click and we can add data labels, and it's just going to add the actual values from the pivot tables on top of the bar. Now, the good thing about doing this is that once we add data labels in this way, it kind of means that we can get rid of this vertical axis running down the left-hand side. Because we have the values displayed on the chart, we don't really need this there. It's just another thing that's kind of unnecessary, taking up space. We can get rid of it. So let's press delete just to get rid of that. And now we just have our data labels. Now we can format these as well. So if we click on one data label, it's going to select them all. You can press Control 1 again to open your Format Data Labels pane on the right-hand side. And there's lots of things we can do in here. One of the more interesting things that we can do, if we go to Label Options, this is where we can specify what we're showing in our labels. So you don't necessarily have to show the value from our pivot table. We could show other things. Now, I have a very small data set, but if I was to choose, let's say, series name, for example, that's just going to say total. If I choose category name, it's actually going to put the market as well as the actual value. So sometimes that can be really useful depending on the data that you're displaying. Now, for me in this chart, that is overkill. And if we scroll down, we can change the label position. So currently I have these showing on the outside end of my bars, but I could choose to show them on the inside end. That can be quite a nice effect. And that's what I mean by having your bar wide enough to accommodate the actual value. We could put them inside the base. There's sometimes a bit of a problem with this because if you don't have a bar that's tall enough, it can look a little bit strange. Or you can put them on the outside end. That's always a reasonably safe option to put them just there. Now, something else that we can do here is maybe I decide that for these particular data labels, I don't necessarily need the currency formatting applied in here. I have it in the table, which is why it's been pulled through to the chart, but I could remove that by expanding number down here, and we can choose a different category of formatting. So if I format these as a number as opposed to a counting format, I can then take the decimal places down to 0 and I get a slightly cleaner looking number. So again, if space is a concern for you, you can do things like that, and it's not actually going to change it in the pivot table, it's just going to change it on the chart. Okay, so quite nice and useful. Now, another thing that you'll notice is that when you're putting together a pivot chart based off of pivot table data, notice that my pivot table data is organized alphabetically. So it's running from A to Z. So markets start with Africa, APAC, Canada, so on and so forth. And That's fine. It's displaying it in the chart in the same way, but it might be that you want to sort this. Instead of having it running A to Z, maybe you want it to run from largest to smallest, something like that. So this is where you would go to your pivot table. You can right click and you can sort largest to smallest, and it's going to change the way that that's ordered in your pivot chart as well. Okay, so don't forget about that. Sometimes it's a bit easier to read if you sort it in that way. So we're looking pretty good. It looks a lot cleaner to when we first started. There's still some other changes that we need to make. So let's start to talk about color. Now, when you create a chart, the default color that you see here is going to be based on whatever theme you have active in your Excel spreadsheet. So for most people, that might be the standard Office theme. If we go to page layout, this is where you can see what themes you have applied. Now, this is kind of the standard Office theme, which most people have by default. I've actually changed mine. I have my own custom theme. So that's what I'm using, but your colors might be slightly different. So if you want to change the colors of these bars, you can do it very simply. You can change the theme simply by selecting a different one from the gallery. Notice that it's also changing the font because these are themes. Themes contain colors, they contain fonts, and they contain effects. So you can use these. Alternatively, you can just click on the bars and go to the Format tab and use Shape Fill, and you can change them to whatever color you like. If you are a PowerPoint user, you might be aware of the eyedropper utility. What the eyedropper utility allows us to do is basically use it to pick up a color anywhere in the PowerPoint slide and use it elsewhere. So that's brilliant if you're trying to match colors or you're trying to use branded colors. Maybe you're trying to match a color from a specific logo. You can literally click on it and transfer it to something else on the screen. Now, unfortunately, in Excel, if I was trying to do that, if I click on these bars and go to the Format tab and Shape Fill, this is where you would find the eyedropper utility in PowerPoint in this little section down here. But notice we don't have one in Excel. There is a way by utilizing a little Windows feature that can allow you to do exactly the same thing. So I'm going to show you this example because I think this is really helpful. So let's just say this is our company logo and it's over here. And I want to color the bars in my chart to match one of the colors in this logo so everything looks cohesive and matches together. So this is where we can use a little feature in Windows called Power Toys to do this. Now, if you've never heard of Power Toys, it is something you have to install onto your PC. If you just Google Power Toys Microsoft, the first link that comes up is going to take you through to this website, and it's simply a case of clicking Install Power Toys. It's an official Windows thing, so you're not downloading anything nasty, and it's really cool. It allows you to do lots and lots of different things. It sort of extends the capabilities of your applications and of Windows, and one of the things you can do with it is you can utilize an eyedropper utility, which we can then use in Excel. So to bring up Power Toys, we need to press Alt Space. You can just search for Power Toys once you've installed it, and it will bring it up. It's this one just here. Now, as I said, there are lots of things you can do with Power Toys, lots of things. We're not going to get into any of these, but one of them is the color picker. Now, notice here the activation shortcut for color picker, Windows key Shift C. So if I know this shortcut, I don't even need to pull this up. I can just, in my Excel spreadsheet, press Windows Shift C, and it turns my cursor into a color picker. Take a look at that. And as I hover over colors in this logo, it's telling me what the hexadecimal value is. So if I have something very specific that I want to use, so maybe this orange color, I can just click. There's the hexadecimal value. I can then copy it to the clipboard, and I can then use it to color my chart bars. So I can then click on my chart bars, go to Format, Shape Fill, Fill Colors, and this is where we can paste in that hexadecimal value. Really cool. And you can see the last colors that you recently used are kept here as well. So that's a really nice little trick because picking up branded colors can be a bit of a pain, particularly if you need to use a specific color in your chart. We're going to add a slicer to our chart. Now, a couple of tricks when it comes to inserting slicers and formatting them. If we click on our chart,
go up to Pivot Chart Analyze. In the filter group, we can choose Insert Slicer. And what you're going to see here is a big long list of all of the fields from your original data set. So we can insert a slicer for any of these fields that we have in our data set. So I'm going to choose category. We're just going to have the one slicer. You can have as many as you like to insert that. Now, when you insert a slicer, they have a very sort of generic standard look and feel to them. And if I was just to leave this as it is, I mean, it works. It's going to work on my data. It's going to filter, but it doesn't really look cohesive. It doesn't look like it's part of this chart at all. And again, I want to try and make everything look really engaging and like it's meant to be there. So what we can do here is apply some formatting to make this look a little bit better. Now notice when I'm clicked on the slicer, we have a slicer contextual ribbon. Now the first thing I'm going to do is, instead of displaying these categories running vertically, I want to display them horizontally. Now we can change that by using, in this buttons group where we have columns, currently it says one column. I can take this up to 3 columns, which will effectively allow me to display these categories running horizontally. I'm just going to expand them out. And let's move that up to resize it. So immediately that's looking a little bit neater. Another thing I might want to do is maybe remove this header information just here. So where we have category and then these buttons, maybe I don't want to display that. We can right click. We can go into our slicer settings. Notice here underneath header, currently display header is ticked. We can deselect it, click on OK, and it gets rid of that header. So we now have a much cleaner looking slicer. The last thing I would probably do here is I would create a custom style for my slicer so that it matches everything that I have in my chart. Now, when it comes to changing the colors of your slicer, we have a gallery of slicer styles. We have some dark styles and we have some light styles. And again, what you see in here are very much based on your theme colors. Now, I change my bars to match the color picked out of the logo. So none of these slicer styles are really going to work well. None of them are very similar to this orange color. What I would probably do here is create a new custom slicer style and use this orange color in the slicer. Now, it's very simple to create a slicer style. You just need to select the one that you're currently using. So you can see the slicer style that's currently in use because it has a border around the outside. So it's this one. Right click and you need to duplicate the style. You can then give your new slicer style a name. So I always call them my initials. And then you can go through and customize each part of that particular slicer. So one of the first things I'd probably want to do here is I don't really want that border around the outside of the slicer. So if I go to whole slicer and format, I can then set the border to none to get rid of that border around the outside. If I wanted to change the colors, I could then go into any of these and make them this orange color. Now, there's lots of different items related to these because you can have a different color if the item's selected and has data. You can have a different color if you just hover over it, a different color if it's unselected. So there's lots of different things you can change in here, but it's basically the same principle. You select what you want to change, you go into format. If you want to change the background fill color, you could do that. You can go to more colors, you can add your hexadecimal value, you can change the font color, you can do whatever you like. I've already got a slicer style or a custom slicer style, which I set up earlier. I basically just went through this process and changed things to the orange color. So if I cancel out of here, once you've created your slicer style, you're going to see it up here in the custom area. And you can simply select it and then you'll have your new slicer style applied and it looks a lot more cohesive with the rest of this chart. If I click away, you can also see that we have no border around the outside. So when I remove the grid lines from Excel, you can see it looks like it's supposed to be part of this chart. I also might want to remove the border around the outside here. So I'm going to select the chart, go to Format, Shape Outline, and we're going to say No Outline. And then you can move the slicer so it's a bit closer to it. And we have a really nice looking cohesive chart. This time I'm displaying time-based data because, as we know, when we're using a line chart, it works best for data that changes over time. So I have some months of the year and I have the sum of sales.
So let's go in, let's insert a chart, and this time we're going to insert just a line chart. I'm going to do a lot of the same formatting. Again, I don't really need the total. That's kind of irrelevant in this case, so I'm going to delete that. And I'm also going to hide all the field buttons on the chart. Let's take a look at the data. So if you notice, the chart doesn't have all of the months. We have some gaps. So we have January, February, March, April, and then we skip over May. So there's obviously no data for May, June, July, August, September, but then we don't have October, November, and December because my chart is just going to show where we have data. So if I didn't have any sales in May, it's just not going to show it. Now, it might be that you're happy with it like that, but a much better way is to include all of the months, but just have it at 0 where there were no sales. So how can we change this to include any of these months? Well, what we can do is right click on the date and go into field settings. And we're going to go to layout and print. And we want to select this option here, show items with no data. When I click on this, it's going to show the items that don't have any data. And these little weird dates just here, don't worry about those. That's because I deleted a whole heap of data from the data set first of all. So I'm just going to remove those. We now have all of the months showing in the chart, but there's just no data. Now, this looks a bit weird because we have a broken line chart. I don't really want it to look like that, but I do want it to include all of the months. Now, it doesn't matter because what we can do is we just need to add a 0 in for all of these months to get that line to run correctly. So again, a quick way of doing this is if we right click, we can go into pivot table options, and we can say in this format group for empty cells show, instead of nothing, we want to show a 0. And that's basically going to join that line back up, but it's not going to be a broken line. It just goes down to 0 when there haven't been any sales. All right, so just think about that when you're working through your chart as well. Let's take a look at this little vertical axis just here. This looks pretty good. Now, sometimes if you have an axis like this and it's displaying values, it might be that your values are very, very long. If this was millions of sales, so if we had very, very large numbers here is what I'm trying to say, this can start to look a bit strange because your axis just has a very, very large number in here. So this might be where you want to start thinking about using custom formatting just to shorten the values that you're seeing. For example, I can see here, I've got, these are in thousands. We've got 2,000, 4,000, 6,000. Maybe instead of this longer number, I just want it to say 2K, 4K, 6K, 8K, things like that. I can do that using custom formatting. So if we click in the vertical axes, Control 1 to pull up format axes, and go all the way down to the bottom where we have number, this is where we can start to change the formatting. So if we go to custom, notice here underneath type, this is what you want to type in to format these numbers with K after them. Okay, I already typed the code in. Once you've applied one code to your data, it will be available for you to select from this drop down. So I did this earlier, so it's selected just here. You would type it into here and click add to get it to appear in the menu above. So this is the format that you need if you want to change that to 2K, 4K, so on and so forth. All right, so think about using custom formatting to shorten the numbers that you're using in your chart. Another thing you might want to do here is you might want to reorder the way that your chart's displaying these months. So currently my chart is showing the data from January to December. But what if I'm an accountant and I want to see this data based off of the financial year? So maybe I want to have the chart starting at April and going all the way through to March. A quick way of reordering everything is if you go to the pivot table, if I want to move April up to the top, I can simply select it, click, and just drag it up to the top, and it's going to rearrange it. So I could select multiple. So April, I want to move all of these. I can drag them up, and I now have my chart based off of the financial year as opposed to the actual calendar year. So again, another little trick, you can drag and drop to move things around. So let's do some fun formatting. Let's select the line Again, Control 1 to open up Format Data Series. A couple of little cool things that we can do in here. If we jump across to Marker and expand Fill, this is where we can change the fill color of the specific markers on the line. But one little option that I quite like, because this is quite a fun little option, is this one just here, Vary Colors by Point. If you want to quickly add some color to your chart, if you click that, it's basically going to make each change in point a different color. So again, makes it look a little bit more interesting. If we select the line and go back to marker, if we don't want that, we can just choose a solid fill color. So maybe instead of vary colors by point, let's go for a pink line. Let's go to the markers option at the top, and I'm going to go to built-in, and I'm going to choose one of these markers. So underneath built-in, instead of just having a round marker, you can choose any of these symbols. And if you choose one of these built-in marker options, if I go for this one, you can then choose the size as well. So I could have this really large if I wanted to, or I could take this down, but I can make them more prominent so they stand out. Now I've filled the marker color with this pink. We also have a border around the outside. I'm just going to do that in the same pink. And then if I want to change the color of the line, of course I can click on the line, go to the line section, and we can change the solid line color to whatever we like just here. Let's change it to solid line, and I want all of them to be pink. So you can really sort of start to change things, jazz it up, make it look less boring. Another really interesting option, and something that I'm seeing fairly frequently, is instead of having an angled line, I've seen people using a smooth line quite a bit. So if you click on the line and scroll all the way down to the bottom, notice we have smooth line just here. If I click this, instead of an angled line, we kind of get that curvy line instead. This one is a stacked column chart, and this is a really cool little technique if you want to add formulas into your charts and also add a target line as well. Here we have a slightly different setup. So I've got some companies A to E. I have some sales figures for those companies, and we have a sales target up here. So basically what I want to do is I want this kind of effect. So what we have is a target line. So whenever the sales target changes, if I change this to 18,000 up here, the target line moves, and notice that those bars are conditionally formatted so that if they fall below the sales target, they show in green. If they fall above, they show in pink. And this is actually a really easy effect to achieve. We just need a couple of formulas and to add a few things into the chart. So let's go back to here and see how we set this up. Now, anything that you want to include in a chart, you need to make sure that you kind of add it into your table over here. So what I need to have a heading that says target met. I'm going to have another one that says target not met. And I'm also going to pull the sales target into this little table as well. Let's format these. Let's make them gray and just resize these columns. Now, this is going to seem a little bit weird, but even though I don't have any data in here yet, I'm going to create the chart first of all. So I'm going to press Control A to select everything. Let's go up to Insert, and this time we're just going to create a regular chart. It's not a pivot chart or anything like that. We're going to add a stacked column chart. So what we have here is the only data series that we have showing are the actual sales, because that's all we have in our table at the moment. But notice in the legend, we have a key for target met, target not met, and sales target, but we don't have any data for that as yet. So as we add data, because this is a stacked column chart, you're going to see this data pile up on top of each of the columns. Now, what we want to do here is we want to use formulas in this particular chart. So we're going to use an if formula to find out if the sales value has met the target or not. So let's type in equals. So if the sales value is greater than or equal to our sales target, and we're going to press F4 to lock because we want to copy this down. If that's true, we want to output the sales value. If it's false, I want a blank cell. So now when I close this off and copy it down, what we should find is that whenever the sales value has met or exceeded the sales target, we have the value in the cell. Whenever it hasn't, we have a blank. And I'm just going to apply comma formatting to make everything look the same. So we're going to do a similar thing over here. We're going to say if And we're going to do another logical test, but this time we're going to test if it's under the sales target. So if the value is less than the sales target, F4 to make it absolute because we're going to copy down. If that's true, we want to output the value into the cell. If it's false, we want a blank. Close the bracket, hit enter. And this time when we copy it down, we should find we have those other values showing. So let's add some formatting. And notice as I'm doing this, it's stacking that information onto the chart. The final thing I want to add into here is the actual sales target. So all I'm going to do is link to the sales target cell. Let's press F4 and copy this down. Now you might be thinking, what on earth are you doing? We're going to make some changes now to make this chart look a little bit better. So I don't want my chart to display like this, but I have all the information that I need. So I need to make some changes as to how we're representing these different values. Now, the first thing here is these sales values, which is represented by the green part of this column, we don't really need those because we have those in these two columns just here. Our formulas are generating these values. So if I click on the chart, you can see here it's showing me the columns that are in use in the chart. We can grab the bottom handle and we can drag in to exclude those sales figures, and it's going to use the target met and the target not met values instead. The next thing we want to do is we want to change the sales target. We don't want that showing as part of the column. We want that to show as a line. So this is where we can click on the bars and change series chart type. At the bottom here, this is where we can define what type of chart we're using for each of our data series. So I want all of these to show as a column, but I don't want sales target to show as a stacked column chart. I want it to show as a line chart instead. And notice as soon as I change that, we get the effect that we're looking for. Click on OK, and we now have a target line, which hopefully will move when we change the sales target value in cell C2, which it does. Notice that those bars change color as soon as I start adding values in. Okay, so a really cool little effect. We can then go in and of course we can start formatting the line however we want. We can change the color, we can add arrows on the end, we can do whatever we like with this particular line. And that's all I've done over here. I've pretty much removed the grid lines. I've moved the legend up to the top and I've just added some arrows on either side of that target line. So that can be a really nice little effect and a really cool way to make your charts a little bit more dynamic. Map charts can look really cool. I always see them used in dashboards. And as you would imagine, the best type of data to use a map chart on is geographical data. I want to show you a little problem that does occur with map charts. I've got some states listed here, and these are states in Australia. Okay, and we'll just say that this is for a store and how much revenue they've generated by each state. So if I wanted to depict this in a map chart, I could click in the data, jump up to insert. In maps, I could go for filled map. Now, these can be a little bit slow to load, but when they do, this isn't going to display as I want it to display. And again, you might need to wait a couple of seconds for it to actually load up. There we go. The data that I've selected is just for Australia, but it's showing me the entire world. Now, why is it showing me a world map instead of just Australia? But that's because the map chart thinks that where I have WA in the pivot table, I'm talking about Washington State as opposed to Western Australia. So it's showing me the whole map because it thinks I've included US-based data as well as Australian data. So a way to get around this is you need to make sure you add the country in as well as the state. So if I delete this out, as soon as I add another column, Control-Shift+ is the shortcut key to add a brand new column. I'm going to type in country, and let's just make that bold. And if we add in Australia, a quick way to copy this down is just to select all of the cells, Control-D to copy down. And now if I do the same thing and insert a filled map chart, it's just going to zoom in on Australia. Okay, I'm not going to get that whole map because it knows I'm talking about Australia and not the US. So just bear that in mind when you're creating map charts.
Another thing I would always advise you do is that you put your data into a table, because notice that currently this state just here, which is Queensland, is in grey, and I haven't included that in my data set. If I was to add this onto the bottom, so if I put Australia, QLD, and 20,000, it doesn't update. I would need to put this data into a table, Control T, because then when I add a new line on the bottom, it is then going to update in the map chart. Okay, so put your data in a table. You cannot create a filled map chart based on pivot table data. Let me show you what I mean. Let's assume that this is a pivot table as opposed to just an Excel table. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to convert this. I'm just going to summarize with pivot table. Let's put it on an existing worksheet. Let's put it down here. We're going to add country to the rows, state, and revenue, basically trying to get it to look like the table above. And we're going to change the report layout to tabular form. Now, what I would need to do is to remove the grand totals and the subtotals, and I want to have Australia copied all the way down. So we can do this by report layout, repeat all item labels. So this is a pivot table. But if I try and create a map chart based off of pivot table data, so if we go to pivot table analyze and pivot chart, and we have map in here, notice we get an error. It says you can't create this chart type with data inside a pivot table. So if you're trying to do this, what you need to do is basically take the data out of the table first of all. So if you've got pivot table data, you want to Control C to copy it, and then you want to just paste it as plain text. So basically, so it looks like this up here, okay? Then create your map chart based off of that new data, and you can always right-click and choose Select Data, and then point it back to the pivot table afterwards. Okay, so the point being here is you cannot create a map chart based off of pivot table data. It needs to be just table data, or you can copy and paste and then redirect back to the pivot table afterwards.
A big congratulations, everyone, for making it all the way to the end of this course. So it's just about time for me to sign off and say goodbye to you all. I hope you enjoyed running through this course as much as I've enjoyed teaching it to you. Once again, my name is Deb. Bye for now.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To see the full course that this video came from, click over there. And click over there to see more videos from Simon Says It.